Hello everyone, this is Michael Regina, the author and illustrator of The Sleepover, the all-ages horror graphic novel from Penguin Razorbill. And welcome again to my channel. I'm here to talk with you a little bit more about my creative process. And specifically today, what I wanted to spend some time talking about was my journey as a writer and some of the resources that have helped me the most in learning to be a writer and hone my craft in the storytelling process. So I wanted to share with you three writing books that have really helped me, I think, learn the craft of writing. But before I did that, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about my own journey as a writer and why these resources became so valuable to me as I begin to discuss each one in their own detail. So, I grew up a artist primarily. Now, the funny thing is I wrote a ton because as a kid, I would write my own comic books because I didn't really have writer friends that would write my comics and then I would draw them. I didn't really have a writer friend that wanted to do that. So if I wanted to have a comic book or write or draw something, I actually had to be the one that came up with the story, generally speaking. So I would write, but I don't think I would have ever considered myself a writer in the traditional or literal sense of the word. I was writing so that I could draw the stories that I wanted to draw. So I don't think I had any real formal understanding of how storytelling works or what a 3-act structure is or a character arc or anything like that. I would just create interesting problems and then try to solve it through the course of a story with characters, which at the end of the day is not a bad strategy. But what it did set me back on was not taking seriously the craft of telling and honing a story until much later in life, actually not until college. So in college, I had begun thinking through the process of maybe going into filmmaking as opposed to making comics, because as a younger writer and a comic book fan, if you wanted to make comics, it generally meant that you were, you were either the writer or the artist, and the appetite for comics, at least in the United States market at the time, was very limited pretty much to superheroes and superhero adjacent type stories by and large. The sort of great movement that we're currently experiencing of the major publishing world, publishing graphic novels and books for kids and that sort of thing, it just didn't really exist. And so, I was thinking about going into filmmaking because I knew the kinds of stories I wanted to tell, and I didn't think there was much of a place for them in the comic book market. So I began learning to write through writing screenplays. I joined a writing group here in town, and we would meet every week and we'd share pages that we were going through and learn from one another. And my teacher, John Bowles, actually did a great job of sort of instilling this real fire within me. And I actually really miss those times. It was a lot of fun to sit in a room with other writers and talk about the craft and create screenplays and chat about them. And it might be a thing that would be worth pursuing again in the future. Maybe I can head up some workshops or something. I don't know. But that was the beginning of my writing process, was that phase. Then when I started to get serious about it again as a writer, I actually wrote my entire first graphic novel, Adamsville, basically gut, just went with my gut on things. And for the most part, I think, I'm really proud of the first Adamsville book. But there's definitely a roughness to the storytelling that I think exists there. I'm going entirely on intuition. And then in the middle of writing that book, a friend of mine, Will Terrell, brought up a book that he had read called Save the Cat. So this is where I'll get into my 3 books in sort of the order in which I learned about them. So Save the Cat is one of those infamous writing books that people either love or hate or love to challenge or whatever the case might be. But he recommended to me that I should check out Save the Cat, and I did, and I loved it. I loved it because one of the things I think is really strange when it comes to writing is there can tend to be this very kind of abstract approach to it, where we almost are afraid of the fact that there are rules that maybe work and sort of principles that apply to storytelling that generally are good. And I think Save the Cat does such a great job of putting it practically how those systems play out, like through its beat sheet and its structure and all those sort of things. And that was really specifically what Save the Cat did such a great job of for me, was helping me understand the beats of a story that generally apply in sort of how a character arcs and how you can carry a character from one stage in the beginning to a different stage by the end. And that if you roughly follow that sort of beat outline process, you'll arrive at something that is a coherent story with characters who change, and that should be pretty entertaining. And it also does a great job of like helping understand what happens in the sort of nebulous Act 2. I think most people have a gut feeling about what should happen in Act 1 and in Act 3 of a story if you adhere to the three act story structure. But the that middle act can be a little bit nebulous because there's sort of you're kind of waffling along with things. You're not quite sure what's important to convey in that. And that book does a great job of helping set some foundations. So I think Save the Cat is worth a read, even if you don't agree with sort of its very regimented approach to story structure. Knowing the rules that he presents there, I think, are extremely important to helping you understand how most stories apply. And if you spend some time going through that beat sheet, watching different movies, it's hard to argue that he's not pretty spot on with a lot of that. But, to each their own. To me, it was a tremendous first book to pick up as a writing tool, and it really helped me begin cracking stories for Adamsville Book 2 and 3, and then obviously within The Sleepover. The second book that really helped me along in my writing journey is a book by Brian McDonald, author Brian McDonald, called Invisible Ink. And Brian actually has a great podcast that I highly recommend listening to as well, called You Are a Storyteller, that he does with Jesse Bryan. And you can watch the episodes on YouTube. Fantastic discussions on the topic that he covers largely in his book. And I found those podcasts to be tremendously helpful along with his book. But in Invisible Ink, it's sort of like, I think of Save the Cat as being, if there's a science to storytelling that I think Blake Snyder is covering in Save the Cat, Brian and Jesse on their podcast, but Brian specifically in the book, he sort of hones in on the heart of storytelling. So it's like one is like the brains and the structure, and the other one's the heart. And it's not that both don't cover those, but Brian is so good at explaining things and concepts like theme and building that theme and letting the elements within your storytelling support that theme and carry your story with emotion and so on. And Brian, like I said, it was sort of like the yin to the yang of whatever Save the Cat was doing for me. So Save the Cat gave me a very great structure on which to start hanging the hats of my story. And Brian sort of really came alongside of that and helped me rediscover the heart of the things that I care about, which are things like deep themes and meaning and that sort of thing. And he has a saying that he brings up in his podcast often, which is that stories provide survival information. And that always comes down to me that, yes, my goal of a story is to be entertaining and interesting and fun, but the story should be conveying something to its audience that they can take home and use. And sort of like the example he would give would be like, someone might say, oh man, it was crazy yesterday. I was standing on the side of the street and I wasn't paying attention. I stepped out on the road and a car nearly hit me. Ah, man, I wish I was paying attention. So like in that process of telling that story, I had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a lesson that I'm conveying back to somebody. And it's his book, Invisible Ink, and the podcast. I just go watch it, read it. It's the best. It's a great book. I can't praise it enough. It's awesome. And it specifically was very helpful for me in writing The Sleepover by helping me really understand and make decisions, especially with the ending of that book, because it does such a great job of this idea of making sure that the decisions that I'm making within the story are thinking about, well, if this is the message I'm trying to convey, what makes the most sense as a next logical step within the story. And that really helped me crack the ending of my book. and then go back and insert a lot of additional scenes and dialogue and so on that I think flesh that meaning out. And lastly, a book that I recently discovered. This was only within the last 6 months or so, but this book has been really helpful as a breakthrough book for me as well, given some frustrations with maybe an overemphasis on this theme component within my storytelling. And this is a book called The Idea by Eric Bork. And Eric actually seems to go in the opposite direction of some of the advice that I'm saying, where he says so much, he looks at it more like from an objective level. If you're trying to sell a movie to Hollywood or a story to Hollywood, the central thing is to solve for what the idea of the story is. What is the central conflict? What is the problem? Because often when we're describing a movie to somebody and we're trying to get them interested, or a book or a TV show, we describe the problems set up by the story, not the thematic elements or necessarily even the individual characters. Or even when we talk about the characters, we talk about the characters in context of the story's problem. And so he uses the acronym around the word problem and to cover these different steps of what he believes go into creating a great idea for stories. I picked this book up, like I said, a few months ago. I've listened to the audiobook twice now. I thought it was just a great dissertation or thinking through how do we create great ideas that have the appeal needed to sort of make it in the marketplace. Really helped me reset some of my thinking with the new book I'm working on, Deepwater Creek, because it helped me to maybe get off some of my overemphasis on ideas of theme that I think were dragging the story tonally into places that I didn't want it to go. And it kicked me back to thinking about the story from the plot standpoint of saying we still need to make, I still need to make a highly entertaining story that also encompasses these things. So what do I need to do? And that sort of backward track was really helpful. So I think that book's also really worth reading. So yeah, those are my 3 books. Save the Cat, I think, is a great structural foundation for like what are the beats within a story and the different genres that exist. The second book, Invisible Ink, I think is a great book that deals with sort of the underlying thematic, emotional beats within a story. Like I said, both of these books cover structure and things really well and themes, but I think Brian does a tremendous job explaining those concepts within his book. And then finally, The Idea, which I think really dives into that above all these things, we need to focus on what is our story, what is the problem of our story, and then the structure, and then thinking through all these elements from the context of the audience viewpoint. The Idea by Eric Bork, I think, is also a great read. So hope these are helpful. Let me know if you check them out, or if there's a book that you think would be worth my time in reading. I'd love to check it out as well. I enjoy reading a lot of books on screenwriting craft or on writing craft. Like I said, I grew up as an artist, so being a writer is a fairly new venture for me, and I feel like there's a lot I'm learning. So if you have something you think is worth checking out, I'd love to learn about it. Otherwise, thank you so much for hanging out, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I hope to do more in the future, discussing the writing craft as well as, role-playing games, these sorts of things. Everything storytelling is what I'm aiming for, and I'd like to do some more content for my younger audience and my readers as well. So take care. Hope to talk to you soon. I hope you're having a great holiday season as well, because this should come out during the middle of that. All right, chat with y'all soon.